traditionally eating disorder treatment has been focused on talk therapy, right? Which we need. We need to have a space to speak, to find our voice, to be able to identify our feelings, to work through things through language. We need that space for sure. And I think because eating disorders are so disembodying, if that's even a word, having a space for that focus is also important. For me in my journey, it's been yoga. But that doesn't mean embodiment is only yoga. Embodiment could be sitting on the bench in the park and just feeling the sun on your face and being very present in that moment.
Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to my special guest for today, Jennifer Kreatsoulas. She's a PhD and certified yoga therapist, author, educator, and founder of Yoga for Eating Disorders, a virtual space for support and community offering yoga therapy, yoga classes, trainings, resources, and more. Jennifer's passions are guiding others in incorporating the teachings and practices of yoga into their recovery care plan and educating professionals. She believes we must include our bodies in healing our minds, and yoga is one way we can do that. Jennifer is the author of Body Mindful Yoga and The Courageous Path to Healing. Her writing about her personal recovery journey and yoga therapy for eating disorders has been featured widely in print, broadcast, and online media. Learn more at www.yogaforeatingdisorders.com. That's with a number 4. Without further ado, here's Jennifer. I'm so delighted to have you here today, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's so great to be with you.
Yeah, I first became aware of you through I knew about you before I signed up for the mentorship for yoga and eating disorders class, but because I had kind of been stalking that course for a while, and it took me a while because I was working on my PhD and still am, but it was a while, but then I finally signed up and I was really grateful for the opportunity because there's such valuable information. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about what that course is for people who might be interested.
Absolutely. Thank you for the space to share about it. And I am so glad that you participated. And it's nice, like these years later, that we still have this connection, right? Yes. So, Yoga and Eating Disorders Mentoring Group is a program. It's a training, although I like to call it a mentorship because I like the idea of bringing people together and we all learn from each other. But it is a training for professionals, whether you're in the yoga space, the eating disorder space, maybe you're a psychologist, a dietitian, maybe you're a coach, a movement therapist, or maybe you're just an individual who's interested in learning about the role of yoga in eating disorder recovery. This training is all about that. It focuses primarily on the movement aspect of yoga and a bit on the breathing aspects. I know for myself and for many, the philosophies of yoga have been incredibly healing. And so I feel like that would be another training I would love to offer. But this specific one is more about movement with a focus on the role of yoga as a pathway to embodiment. So in eating disorders, so often that relationship between mind and body becomes so severely severed. And we lose touch with what it is to be in our bodies, to have bodies, to trust our bodies, to feel safe with our bodies, to be, okay with being seen, being in the world. There's so many layers that happen when one lives with an eating disorder in relationship to the body. So this training is about that, and each module has a different focus. It includes a variety of guest presenters, all of whom have graduated from the training themselves and are now in the world doing really cool work in their respective areas. It's 6 weeks, every other week for 6 weeks. And we meet on Zoom for an hour and a half. Many people are all over the world and can't join a live session, so there's always the option to participate via the recordings. And we're in our 11th cohort right now, and starting in the what time of the year? It's fall. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that happens to me too.
What month it was.
Yeah.
Next year in March, we will have the next cohort. So March 2025, if anyone's listening and is interested, that will be the next opportunity to participate.
So wonderful. One of the things that I thought was really striking for me that was reinforced in the training was languaging and the importance of languaging and offering options. For example, not, describing a yoga pose, like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be done, and then here's regressions if you're not good enough, but just to offer different options. You could do it like this, you can do it like that, and just giving options, um, letting people know that they have choice, and not implying, not having a judgment that's implied by different expressions of that pose.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Language is, as you said, is a major focus in the program. How do we show up with intention and sensitivity in our language? Right? Because this is a practice of guiding movement, of guiding bodies how to move. So how do we be mindful of the eating disorder experience and have a lot of respect for how brave it is for someone to show up and explore being in their bodies when for a time in their life their body was the last place they wanted to be, right? So I always remind the professionals that I teach that remembering that movement is a big ask. It's a big ask. It's not just assumed that, hey, people are going to just drop on their mats and do down dog and smile. It could be a very challenging experience. So just having a lot of respect and compassion for that.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. That makes me think about just embodiment in general. I think that we might have talked about this in a previous conversation. I had been exploring what is the role of embodiment in recovery. And I was doing a lot of brain scratching and just really trying to wrap my head around it. And what I ended up coming up with is that it is necessary but not sufficient. So we need to be embodied. We have to pay attention to our body. We need to be attuned. But that is not everything, because we still, have to have we have to have social support. We have to have, proper nourishment. We have to, take care of our physical body with sleep and hydration. There's other things that are involved, but that embodiment is a necessary part. And I'm just curious if that aligns with your perspective, and, what is the importance of embodiment in recovery according to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a piece of a big picture, right? And I think why I like to highlight that piece is because traditionally eating disorder treatment has been focused on talk therapy, right? Which we need. We need to have a space to speak, to find our voice, to be able to identify our feelings, to work through things through language. We need that space for sure. And I think because eating disorders are so disembodying,
Mm-hmm.
if that's even a word, having a space for that focus is also important, right? And it doesn't have to look one way. For me in my journey, it's been yoga, but that doesn't mean embodiment is only yoga. Embodiment could be sitting on the bench in the park and just feeling the sun on your face and being very present in that moment,
Mm.
right? It could be, being with animals, being with plants. It could be being on the floor with your kids or your nieces and nephew or whoever, and just being very present in that experience.
Mm.
Um, I think there's lots of ways that we can explore embodiment. And I think there's a place for, um, in the treatment process, dedicated time to that, right? And then as we become more aware of embodiment and get comfortable with it, and as we expand in our recoveries, then these other opportunities, experiences come in, like the ones I was just mentioning, and we recognize, like, oh wow, like I'm really here right now. I'm using my arms to play jump rope with my kids,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's just like an awareness that builds. But I think it's just one piece of the puzzle. Like you said, there's so many other aspects, thinking about our sleep hygiene,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about relationships and boundaries and how we move through the world socially, and the work we need to do to feel okay doing that,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's just so many layers, but I think I encourage embodiment to be included.
Mm-hmm. It was really touching. What I felt my eyes tearing up when you were talking about the different ways that we can experience embodiment in our lives. And that kind of led me to another question about the role of yoga, but you kind of answered it, like, that maybe, you emphasize yoga in your program, but that actually yoga doesn't have to be the thing, that there can be different avenues towards embodiment. So it doesn't necessarily even have to be a movement type of expression. It could be dance, it could be the gym, it could be other sort of movement, but it could also not even be movement related. It could be taking a moment to just breathe and spend time with loved ones or pet your dog or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, right? Because the eating disorder is such a numbing experience, right? So when we're engaging in activities where, that we take the edge off that numbness, or we're not numb anymore, and we're actually aware of how we are participating in a moment, right? Through our whole entire being, how we're participating, how we're there. That's really powerful. And it's a huge paradigm shift from living with an eating disorder to recovering from one.
Do you think the awareness automatically improves interoception, or poor interoception being related to having eating disorder symptoms, and yoga being one way helping to improve with interoception, and also yoga being proven to help with eating disorder symptoms? Are you aware, is it merely the change in the awareness that allows someone to have a better sense of what is true?
I think it's a lot of things. I think, I always say with yoga practice or whatever that modality is going to be, it's time and repetition of doing it, right? So it's not just one practice or 1 week of doing it or 1 month even. It's time and repetition. So we need time and repetition to rewire our brains, right? We need it for that. We need it to build our ability to tolerate
Mm-hmm.
what our awareness is now showing us, right? Like sensation can be very difficult for someone who's been numbed out or are really afraid of feeling their bodies. So I don't think it's like a one time and then we're good. I think there's a slow build and it's not linear,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because as we know, while we're working on our recovery, life is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. So there's still challenges that are coming in and maybe intensifying symptoms or creating, I don't like to use like lapses and setbacks. I don't like that language,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a straight line. And these practices can be something that we return to over and over and over again. They kind of become this like stable foundation that we build and that we can return to over and over and over again. And maybe one day we get on the yoga mat and we can really tolerate the sensations that we're feeling and maybe even feel good about them. And then a week later, because of whatever's going on in life, that might be too much to feel,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that it's a slow build. And with support, I always encourage, people to take what happens in a yoga class to their therapist. Or if you're working with a yoga therapist like myself, when we're doing practices in session, there's someone right there to process those experiences with, right? To be able to say, like, oh, I had a sensation in my hamstring and that was really uncomfortable for me to have to pay attention.
Do you think one of the main ways that practicing yoga or challenging yourself in a physical way, that it might be effective in eating disorder recovery is because it's sort of like a proxy to handle emotions with regards to the eating disorder? So for example, in the case of binge eating, if someone doesn't like experiencing the urge to binge because it can be interpreted as a very uncomfortable sensation, right? But if they can be on the yoga mat and be with what they interpret as an uncomfortable sensation of like stretching in a pose and, oh, this is so annoying. But if they can be with that with that sensation, then later on, if they experience a sort of dysregulated, uncomfortable sensation of that urge to binge, but because they were with that uncomfortable sensation earlier that day doing that pose, then they realize that they have the resiliency and the tolerance and they can apply it to the eating disorder experiences.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's definitely a way these moments can translate off the mat and into recovery, right? Absolutely. I think that's one of the beautiful powers of it. I mean, you mentioned choice earlier, right, as being really important. And so when we can experiment with choice on the yoga mat, we might then feel more resilient to experiment with choice in our recoveries or in our relationships or
Mm-hmm.
in boundary setting or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I think it's a building process. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a one and done, but
Yeah.
it's a building process. And what just came to mind is, we've been talking about yoga, but I think it's important to clarify that we're talking more about like a therapeutic style
Mm-hmm.
of yoga. We're talking more about a gentle, trauma informed
Mm-hmm.
way of practice versus more of like a fitness
Right.
focused practice, at least for, early stages of
Mm-hmm.
recovery. And this isn't to say those kinds of practices are
Right.
wrong. It's just
Right.
more from that therapeutic standpoint is where I'm coming
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for clarifying. I'm doing my study on sensory strategies for coping with urges to binge eat. And what has been really powerful for me has been big movements. Like I feel like traditional mindfulness of sitting still, try to put your eyes on the inside of your belly and notice the small movement of, your stomach going in and out and all this little stuff. I just felt like it wasn't enough for me. And it was when I started exploring really heavy proprioceptive input, like using like a heavy massager or like tapping myself using like a harsh fabric and like get like kind of rubbing that on myself. Those sort of things have been really helpful for me. And so that kind of inspired me to do my study because I was like, I'm probably not the only one in the world who feels this way, that like these small sort of movements were not enough and would benefit from more, heavier sensory input. And this is actually what they've been doing in occupational therapy for a long time with children who have sensory processing difficulties and sometimes autism spectrum disorder. They provide a lot of heavy sensory input with like weighted blankets, have them do like jumping jacks or different sort of things that helps them to regulate their nervous system. So I've been sharing these strategies with some people for my study, and some people do like the larger movements, but some people don't like the larger movements. Some people prefer, things that are, whether they have, um, movement limitations or they have an eating disorder history where they don't want to do a lot of movement because they don't want to, feel like that they're going to go on the compulsive exercise route or that sort of route, or whether they feel frozen. And so they want to do things that they can do when they're just in place. So there's various reasons why someone might want to choose to not engage in large movements. But I'm just curious, all this is to say how you as a yoga therapist, when you're working with a client, is there a way that you assess when you're providing them with options for movements, something that is just in place and just doing something as simple as a mudra, or having them do a large movement that engages their whole body? How do you know what might be helpful for them? Or how do you kind of like assess that? Or do you just ask them?
from. First, I'm really glad that you found those things that help you.
Thank you.
It's, when we find those things, it's like sacred, it's golden.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I think this idea, the way I think about it is, meeting someone's energy where they are, right? And so in yoga therapy, it's a one-on-one. So I have the ability to have a conversation with the client and find out where they are that day, learn about their preferences, learn about their fears about movement, learn about, you know, um, kind of what their intentions are for yoga therapy. So it's very much a meeting the person in front of me on any given session, right? And then over time we build that rapport, and I just understand that this person, they like the bigger movements. This person wants to be on the floor. We build in ways and at a pace that is appropriate for that client. There's no right or wrong, right? It's just creating the space for self-discovery and self-exploration, which is, kind of fundamental philosophy of yoga. That's what it is. It's a practice of self-discovery. I spend time getting to know the client and really taking their preferences into consideration. And I always let them know that when we're in a practice, if anything doesn't feel good or it's activating or it's just not meeting you where you are, just interrupt me, let me know, and we'll shift gears, right? So we can be in dialogue during the practice, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be an important thing to state explicitly because maybe they don't know what they want, Like, and then they start doing it and they're
Exactly.
like, no.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I like to just take it as it comes. And, I might go into a session and I always write down before my session, like some possible types of practices or meditations or mudras we're going to do. They're just kind of like there in case the person in front of me doesn't know what they want. And I
Yeah.
can say, well, this is what I thought of today. How does this sound? Right. And sometimes it's a combination of big and smaller movements. Some
Mhm.
people maybe start off, they come into session, they're feeling a little keyed up, a little anxious. We need to get some of that out.
Mhm.
And then we settle on the ground.
So, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. If you are offering, some movements to your client, some poses, and they are not following what you say or doing their own thing, is that okay? I mean, I'm imagining that most people are not rebellious. They probably are just probably going with the flow. But if they do happen to just, I'm imagining myself and I'm like, I'll do this. Is that okay if they're kind of going with the intention of following you, or is it okay if they just kind of do their own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really had that experience. I think, the type of movement we're doing is often we're sitting in a chair or we're laying on the floor. We're rarely doing a lot of standing stuff. I mean, it's not that we don't. It just really depends on the client, honestly. But I think part of my philosophy around choice, right? So like if the client started going off and doing something different,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, oh, that cool, go for it. Like we can work that in here, no
Yeah. Yeah.
problem. It's their experience. When I was a yoga therapist at a treatment center, I think that's when it would show up a lot, where people just resisting or not participating.
Mm.
And I always just held compassion because I could put myself in their shoes and remember what it was like to be in treatment and knowing how exhausting that experience is and how just overwhelming and depleting that experience can be. And how, at that point in the recovery process, for many, being in their body is like the last place they want to be, right? So when it would show up in that setting, it was trying to find the language around like being supportive, encouraging, compassionate, just allowing the space to be what it needs to be, um, and still like inviting people in, right? And however they responded to the invitation was up to them, but just keeping that invitation going.
If we think about yoga as a tool to facilitate more embodiment for someone who is looking to recover from binge eating, food addiction, kind of like this more bulimic binge type behaviors, and they want to gain presence with themselves and connection with themselves and sort of to try proactively to trying to connect with themselves as much as possible so that they can combat the dissociative pulls of the binge eating that are getting at them. Is there a certain pose or a certain movement, or is it just the whole practice in general that would be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really believe in prescribing poses. Everybody's different, everybody responds to things differently.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to teach some like grounding tools, right? So I often will talk about the feet and how when we're in our heads or in that dissociated space,
Mm-hmm.
we forget we're connected to the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're like just existing up here when we forget about the earth. So we'll do some grounding through the feet. And so I always tell people, just find your feet, find your feet, drop your awareness down to your feet. I do a lot with the hands. Um, I find the hands to be one of the less threatening body parts for people to work with
Yeah.
who have body image challenges, right? So I like to work with the hands. So one thing a lot of my clients like is this, I just call it hand breathing. There's probably a better name, but it's like inhale, open your hands, exhale, close. Right? And you can open to the range that feels good for you, right? So for you, someone who needs bigger movements, you might be inhale, like you're really opening, and you might be exhale, making a fist, right? Some people, it's soft, right? And you can move at your own pace. Um, I often will guide it as we focus on the right hand a few times, we focus on the left hand a few times, we do both hands a few times. And the nervous system responds to that, right? Because the breath is really present. There's a rhythmic motion. It's intentional, and it can just kind of be like a regulating type practice. I also like to kind of do this like palm press where it's like, take an inhale and press into the anxiety, press into the urge, press into whatever it is there. And then keep the hands together and exhale, just do the opposite, let everything soften. Right? And then inhale, press into it, like whatever it is, just go for it. And then soften. Right? So these little kinds of tools that you could take with you anywhere, right? That engages the body in a way that isn't overwhelming, doesn't require a yoga mat,
Mm-hmm.
like just so a lot of those types of things I'll get people doing. And that can be a nice entryway into the bigger shapes and fuller practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great. Some of the strategies that I've been sharing are similar. Like I have one that's called palm press that's similar. I don't tie it to any imagination or any words or anything, but it's just, being present with the sensations. And then I also have one that's called squeeze hands. And it's just like this. But these ones are great because, as you mentioned, they can be done anytime, any place, and it's very subtle. So if someone's in a public place and they don't want to call attention to themselves, then they can engage in these
Exactly.
sort of movements, and it can help them regulate. And it doesn't have to be a full vinyasa.
No, it doesn't. And I also, I know for myself, like just changing your environment for 5 minutes, right, can be really helpful too. So the process of like walking yourself out of a room, putting yourself somewhere else,
Hmm.
like literally changing your space. It's a symbolic way to just clear,
Hmm.
you know, to regroup, to reset. And I think that's also really key because it's that to do that, you have to own that you need something different. Like you need to own that you need to make a change,
Hmm.
a shift, right? You need to assert yourself and take yourself to another place, right? So it's this great way of seeing yourself and supporting yourself.
Do you ever in your clients with your sessions do any vocalizations?
No, just because that's not an area that I'm very comfortable with.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool. Yeah. I like to talk to myself sometimes. Like in my recovery, I would yeah, just talk it out to myself, instead of keep it, because I think a lot of like particularly like urges can feel to me, they felt very amorphous and just kind of like this kind of inexplicable dark overwhelming sensation. But how can you address or do anything, manage anything that has no name or form or anything like that? And so I would just talk it out. I literally would just talk about things, or just make sounds, like just doing anything to kind of create presence in myself, like make sounds or hum, um, sing, just do anything to kind of ground me, and then also to try to kind of illuminate what I was feeling and just talk to myself. Even in public, I would just put on headphones and pretend I'm talking to someone, and that was kind of that was helpful for me. Okay, well, actually, one thing I want to say, I'm really fascinated first by the fact that you are a PhD in literature and that you are actually doing the work that you do. And I'm just curious. I know that you do a lot of, you've produced some great books and that you do a lot of writing. Um, how else does having your PhD in literature integrate into your work that you do now?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. When I was getting my PhD, it was with the intention to be an academic for the rest of my life, right? Um, but that shifted, and it does tie in because I'm talking to people all the time, right? So there's that element of communication, spoken and written. It's helped me to be able to listen to people and listen to their stories, right? To think about the significance of their stories and have a way to reflect that back. Because when you're working with literature and you're writing about literature, you're reading a story, you're finding aspects of that story that are of interest for whatever reason, and then you're learning how to communicate that to your audience, right? So the communication side of things, definitely the writing. I love writing, and that's prepared me to be able to do this. And then my work with professionals around language, that directly ties into my PhD work because language is everything when you're a literature PhD. So, and it brings me joy. Like it brings me joy to be thinking about language and dissecting language and having conversations with others about language that really puts me in my happy academic place in my heart.
That's wonderful. Um, so, do you have a favorite mantra of or affirmation related to recovery that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's begin again, right? It's just those two words, begin again. Something that I used to always tell myself because you can probably relate. You know, it's a lot of feels like there's a lot of starts and stops in different phases of recovery, and whether that's like in a day's time, an hour's time, a year's time, however, whatever. There's it's just so nonlinear, right? And so just this idea that I could always begin again, right? And that really that's all that matters is that I began again, right? Not the time that I decided was lost, not the use of eating disorder behaviors, not all of it. No, I'm choosing to begin again, and that's where I focus, right? And so I share that with often this idea, like because so many times clients will come and they'll be so down on themselves, they'll have so much shame for struggling, right? And I think just those like compassionate words of like it's okay, you can begin again. I also it's not much of a mantra or affirmation, but something that just came to me that I often share with people that tell me they find it helpful is, we often think about recovery as like the top of a mountain somewhere like over there, right? It's this destination. It's just I need to get there, all the way over there, and that's so overwhelming. And you can't imagine it. Like you can't even picture like what your life is going to be over there,
Hmm.
right? So I always say like recovery is today. Like it's the choices today. That's all you need to worry about. The choices you make today, right? Because choices build on each other. We gain momentum, right? Whether we're making eating disorder choices or recovery aligned choices, there's a momentum, right? And so if we can focus each choice one at a time, recovery today, that's the work.
Those are both so profound. As you said, the begin again, again. I felt myself, my my eyes watering up because it's such a profound reminder, and not only just for people recovering from eating disorders, but for every person in life needs to hear that again and again. So that one I really, really love. And the second one that you shared about recovery being something that you focus on for today, I think that's also a really interesting perspective too, of tying into, you know, what is recovery? And the question is, we still don't have a good answer for it. Why don't we just focus on the best that we can do today? Because honestly, today is all that exists anyway.
Yeah,
So I think that that's a really empowering perspective on recovery. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, what you're offering, where can they find more information?
sure. My website is yoga for the number four eatingdisorders.com. You're also welcome to email me, Jennifer at yogaforeatingdisorders.com, on social media, and facilitate a Facebook group if anybody's on Facebook and feels that is helpful. It's called Yoga for Eating Disorders Community, and everybody is welcome.
It's a great community. I can vouch for it. It's very active and there's a lot of support there. I want to thank you so much for being my guest today. It was so special to have you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Christina. Thank
you.
you so much.